Hello friends, today we will be discussing some important MCQ and image based questions in pediatrics. So let's start. First question, a baby was born to a primigravida at 30 weeks of gestation and has stable vitals. There is no evidence of any perinatal complication. What should be the best initial method of feeding? So let's look at the pointers here. 30-week gestation, very important. What are the various feeding guidelines for preterm babies, as we have already discussed? In less than 28 weeks, and because there is no proper sucking mechanism, no proper sucking effects are there. There are no proper sucking effects. So what we prefer? We prefer IV fluids and TPN. IV fluids or plus minus total parenteral nutrition. In 28 to 31 weeks, sucking buds develop. Sucking buds develop, but there is no coordination between suck, swallow and breathing. No coordination between suck, swallow and breathing. So what we prefer? We prefer orogastric tube or nasogastric tube feeding. Orogastric tube or a nasogastric tube feeding. So here is our answer. 30 weeks of gestation, stable vitals, no any perinatal complications. So the answer is C, that is orogastric tube feeding. Discussing the other methods of feeding, in 32 to 34 weeks, there is slightly mature suck pattern has developed. Mature pattern of sucking develops, and there is also coordination between breathing and the swallowing. And there is also coordination between breathing and swallowing. There is coordination between breathing and swallowing. So what we will prefer? We will prefer a Katori spoon feeding or a Paladay feeding. Katori spoon feeding and a Paladay feeding. And more than 34 weeks, mature suck developed, and there is more coordination between breathing and swallowing. Mature suck, there is more maturity in the sucking pattern, and there is more coordination between breathing and swallowing. More coordination between breathing and swallowing. What we will prefer in this case? Breastfeeding. Okay, guys. So I think it is clear to you. Less than 28 weeks, there is no proper sucking effort, so we prefer IV fluids plus minus total parenteral nutrition. 28 to 31 weeks, sucking buds develop, but there is no coordination between suck, swallow and breathing, so we prefer orogastric tube or a nasogastric tube feeding. 32 to 34 weeks, so sorry, it should be 32 to 34 weeks, the mature pattern of sucking develops, so there is coordination between breathing and swallowing, and we prefer Katori spoon and the Paladay feeding. And more than 34 weeks, the mature sub pattern develops and there is more coordination between breathing and swallowing. So we will prefer breastfeeding. So the answer is the orogastric. So the answer is orogastric tube feeding, that is C. Coming to the next question. This was the orogastric tube feeding. This was the answer. Question 2. A baby was noted to have a diffuse edematous collection of fluid on the scalp right after vaginal delivery. The most probable diagnosis is Kefal hematoma, subdural hematoma, caput succedaneum, or subgaleal hemorrhage. So the question is about the birth swellings or the head swellings at the time of birth in a newborn. So there is diffuse edematous collection of fluid on the scalp right after vaginal delivery. So this can be the most common swelling that is present right after birth, and that is diffuse edematous collection is caput succedaneum. It is caput succedaneum. So now let's differentiate between caput succedaneum and Kefal hematoma, because this is a potential MCQ. Various times it has been asked. So now we will differentiate between caput succedaneum and Kefal hematoma. Caput succedaneum, it is more common, and it is Kefal hematoma is less common. The caput succedaneum, it occurs immediately after birth. Immediately after birth, whereas Kefal hematoma almost takes 12 to 24 hours to develop after birth. It may take 12 to 24 hours to develop after birth. In caput succedaneum, there is edema in the layers of the scalp. The cause is edema in the layers of scalp, whereas the caput succedaneum, there is subperiosteal hemorrhage. Whereas in Kefal hematoma, there is subperiosteal hemorrhage. Subperiosteal hemorrhage. Caput succedaneum, it crosses the suture line. Whereas Kefal hematoma doesn't cross the suture line. Also, caput succedaneum, there is fluid collection is there, whereas in Kefal hematoma there is blood collection because there is subperiosteal hemorrhage. And in caput succedaneum disappears in next 2 to 3 days, whereas Kefal hematoma may take 4 to 6 weeks to disappear, whereas caput succedaneum can disappear in next 2 to 3 days after birth. And there are more chances of complications associated with Kefal hematoma as compared to caput succedaneum. Complications are nil, whereas in Kefal hematoma, complications like jaundice can occur. So this was about caput succedaneum and Kefal hematoma, and we have got our answer. Diffuse edematous collection of fluid on the scalp right after vaginal delivery is caput succedaneum. This was the answer, caput succedaneum. Coming to the next question. A 4-year boy presented with hemarthrosis of left knee after history of fall. Deficiency of which factor can lead to the following condition? There is a pictorial representation also. A knee is shown, which is showing diffuse swelling, and this is hemarthrosis. So, deficiency of which factor can lead to the following condition? 1. Willebrand disease, vitamin K deficiency, thrombocytopenia, and factor 8 deficiency. So, the question says a 4-year-old boy who presented with hemarthrosis of left knee or history of fall, and which factor can lead to the following condition. Here, when we look at the following choices which are given, factor 8 deficiency looks to be the most suitable choice in this, because factor 8 deficiency is X-linked recessive, and here there is a boy who is presenting with hemarthrosis of the left knee. Hemarthrosis is the most common presentation in hemophilia, and the most common hemophilia is hemophilia A, that is due to factor 8 deficiency. So the most suitable choice, or the most option which is the correct option, is factor 8 deficiency. Factor 8 deficiency is hemophilia A, that is autosomal, that is X-linked recessive. Hemophilia A is X-linked recessive. Sorry. Stop. Hemophilia A is X-linked recessive. So males are more commonly affected. Males are more commonly affected, and the most common is hemophilia A. Most common hemophilia is hemophilia A, and it can be divided into severe, moderate, and mild hemophilia on the basis of the absence of the factor 8 levels. And the most common clinical presentation is hemarthrosis. And what are the lab findings? The lab findings or the coglogram will be raised APTT. Raised PTT and normal PT. PT will be normal bleeding time and normal platelet counts. And normal platelet counts, and treatment is factor replacement. Treatment is factor replacement. And the treatment is factor replacement. So we have seen this hemophilia factor 8 deficiency. A 4-year-old boy presented with hemarthrosis after history of fall. What is the most common factor? It's factor 8 deficiency caused by hemophilia A, X-linked recessive, and most common presentation is hemarthrosis. The most common presentation is hemarthrosis, and lab findings are raised PTT and normal PT, normal BT, and the normal platelet counts, and the treatment is factor replacement. Now coming to the next question. A 6-year-old child presented with generalized edema and ascites. There was no hypertension or hematuria. Renal function tests were normal. Urine analysis revealed massive proteinuria. Most probable underlying diagnosis is membranous glomerulonephritis, that is option A. Option B, minimal chain disease. Option C, post streptococcal glomerulonephritis. And option D, IgA nephropathy. So the examiner or the question says that is a 6-year-old child who is presenting to our OPD with generalized edema and ascites, and there is no hypertension or hematuria. Renal function tests are normal, and urine analysis revealed massive proteinuria. So the girl is having generalized edema, that there is edema, and there is also ascites and massive proteinuria. So this is a case of minimal chain nephrotic syndrome. Minimal change nephrotic syndrome. This is case of minimal change nephrotic syndrome, and nephrotic syndrome is characterized by nephrotic syndrome. It is characterized by massive proteinuria, which we have in this massive proteinuria. Then we have hyperalbuminemia, then we have hypercholesterolemia, then we have ascites or generalized edema. And approximately 90% of children with nephrotic syndrome are idiopathic, that is idiopathic nephrotic syndrome, and most common of these is minimal chain disease, about 85% of the total cases. Most common is minimal change nephrotic syndrome. Okay. So this is about nephrotic syndrome, massive proteinuria, hyperalbuminemia, hypercholesterolemia, and edema, and without evidence of any specific systemic cause. And most common cause is minimal change nephrotic syndrome. So here in an option, we have generalized edema, we have ascites, no hypertension or hematuria. If there is hypertension, hematuria present, it points towards the diagnosis of a nephrotic syndrome. So, and renal function tests are also normal, and there is massive proteinuria. So it points to the favor of minimal change disease, and we have our answer, that is minimal change disease. So the answer is minimal change disease. Next question. A 10-year-old boy was found to have short stature, but his bone age was found to be equal to the chronological age. The child has A. Constitutional delay, B. Familial short stature, C. Precocious puberty, or D. Hypothyroidism. So the question here deals with the short stature. That is, a 10-year-old boy was found to have short stature. What is the definition of short stature? Short stature is height for age of the children is below the third centile or -2 standard deviation for the, population mean. Height for age below the third centile or -2 standard deviation below the population mean. That is, we have short stature. In constitutional short stature, it is the most common cause of short stature. And very important thing is, that is, the growth velocity is the normal. It shows normal growth velocity. The normal growth velocity and most common cause of the short stature. Other things important about it are birth, weight, and length. Birth, weight, and length are normal. There is family history of delayed puberty in this case. Family history of delayed puberty, and the adult height is normal. Adult height is normal. Adult height is normal, but puberty is delayed. There is delayed puberty, and bone age is also delayed. That is, bone age is less than the chronological age. Bone age is delayed. So this was about constitutional delay. In short stature, stop. Start. In familial short stature, same birth weight and length are normal. There is in this case there is family history of short stature, growth velocity are normal, adult height which is reached is short, puberty is normal, and the bone age is also normal. So in this choice, though his bone age is found to be equal to the chronological age, so here comes our answer, that is the familial short stature. Familial short stature we have already discussed. It has a normal growth velocity, birth weight and length are normal, but what it differentiates from the constitutional delay, that is adult height is short. Adult height is short, puberty is at normal age, and the bone age is also normal. Bone age is also normal. So this is about this option. This is about this question. The 10-year-old boy found to short stature. His bone age was found to be equal to the chronological age, and the answer is familial short stature. Coming to the next question. A 3-year-old child is brought by parents with history of seizures and developmental delay. He has multiple hypopigmented macules over the back. What is the most probable diagnosis? Pictorial representation is also seen. There are hypopigmented macules over the back. Choices are neurofibromatosis type 1, tuberous sclerosis, Sturge-Weber syndrome, or von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. Option A, neurofibromatosis type 1. Option B, tuberous sclerosis. Option C, Sturge-Weber syndrome. And option D, von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. So our question has a child presents with history of seizures, developmental delay, and multiple hypopigmented macules. There are multiple hypopigmented macules on back. These are ash leaf shaped macules. These are known as ash leaf shaped macules. Ash leaf shaped macules. So the answer is very clear now. That is tuberous sclerosis. The answer is tuberous sclerosis. Answer is tuberous sclerosis. So let's discuss something about tuberous sclerosis. First, it is autosomal dominant. Other features which are present, the most common features are skin lesions, which are hyperpigmented ash leaf shaped macules, adenoma sebaceum or angiofibromas, Sjagren patches, or the subungual fibroma. What other skin lesions can be present? Skin lesions. One we have already discussed, that is ash leaf shaped macules, which are hypopigmented patches on the back. These are hypopigmented patches on the back. Hyperpigmented patches on the back. Then there is adenoma sebaceum. There is adenoma sebaceum, which are angiofibromas. Or Sjagren patches. Or subungual fibromas. Subungual fibromas. Also, they have can be associated with developmental delay and convulsions can occur. Developmental delay and convulsions can occur. One very important high yield fact is myoclonic jerk can occur, which is associated with West syndrome, and the drug of choice is vigabatrin. West syndrome, myoclonic jerks. In fancy, myoclonic jerks can often occur in tuberous sclerosis and is associated with West syndrome, associated with tuberous sclerosis, and the drug of choice is vigabatrin. Vigabatrin. The drug of choice here is vigabatrin. So here's our answer. Multiple hyperpigmented macules over the back, Hasley-shaped macules, history of seizures and developmental delay. So we have tuberous sclerosis as the answer. Next question. A 10-year-old female child with short stature, webbing of neck and cubitus valgus. Her karyotyping study is normal. The most probable diagnosis is A. Turner syndrome, B. Down syndrome, C. Edwards syndrome, and D. Noonan syndrome. So the question here has a female with short stature, webbing of neck, and the cubitus valgus. Short stature, webbing of neck, and cubitus valgus. But the most important thing here is the karyotyping study is normal. Karyotyping study is normal. But the first look, when you read short stature, webbing of neck, and the cubitus valgus, you will think it is Turner's syndrome. But in Turner syndrome, karyotype is 45XO. 45XO. So this is the karyotype. This is not normal. In Turner syndrome, karyotype is not normal. So what is the diagnosis here? This is Noonan syndrome. Turner's and Noonan syndrome are almost same. They're almost similar. But main is the karyotyping. In karyotyping, Noonan syndrome, it is autosomal dominant. And the karyotyping is normal. It is autosomal dominant with normal karyotype. And what are the clinical features of Noonan syndrome? There can be hypertelorism, epicanthus, there is short stature, webbing of neck, pectus carinatum or pectus cavatum, cubitus valgus. So there can be short stature, webbing of neck, and webbing of neck, short stature. There can be widely spaced nipples. Widely spaced nipples can be there. And there can be cubitus valgus, increased carrying angle of the elbow, cubitus valgus, and there can be pulmonary valve stenosis. In heart, the most common is pulmonary valve stenosis, most common heart defect, heart disease. Right? So they have short stature, webbing of neck, widely spaced nipples, cubitus valgus, that is increased carrying angle of the elbow joint, and pulmonary valve stenosis. So this is about Noonan syndrome, and they have autosomal dominant. So the answer here is Noonan syndrome. Female child with short stature, webbing of neck, cubitus valgus with normal karyotyping study. The answer is Noonan syndrome. Next question. A 6-year-old child with progressive ataxia, raised intracranial pressure, loss of weight, and enhancing midline mass should be suspected to have which malignancy? So the question here is, a 6-year-old child we have progressive ataxia, raised intracranial pressure, and loss of weight and enhancing midline mass. These all are symptoms of a brain tumor, and now we'll have to find out which brain tumor, that is if medulloblastoma or glioblastoma multiforme. They all, because they all point towards a brain tumor with progressive ataxia, raised intracranial pressure, and enhancing midline mass. If in less than 1 year, we know most of them are supratentorial. Less than 1 year of life, most of them are supratentorial tumors. More than 1 year, we have So the question is asking 6-year child, progressive ataxia with intracranial pressure raised, loss of weight, and enhancing midline mass. So it is suspected to have which malignancy? Raised intracranial pressure and ataxia. They commonly give a clue to infratentorial brain tumors. Infratentorial brain tumors. And in the age group of 1 to 10 years, these are most common. Infratentorial tumors are most common. Infratentorial brain tumors are common in the age group of 1 to 10 years, and first being juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma and the other being medulloblastoma. These are common. Medulloblastoma, right? And a medulloblastoma. And there is in medulloblastoma, there is enhancement of the mass. So all these features in medulloblastoma, there is enhancement of the mass along with raised intracranial pressure with ataxia. So they all point towards the feature of medulloblastoma. That is, medulloblastoma is the answer. It is a common malignancy in children with raised intracranial pressure, ataxia. It is an infratentorial tumor, and enhancement of the mass is present. So the answer is medulloblastoma. Coming to this next question. A baby is born prematurely at 32 weeks of gestation by cesarean delivery for fetal distress. Neonate develops tachypnea, flaring, subcostal and intercostal retractions immediately after birth. Chest radiograph is shown below. What is the best treatment plan in the present case? This is the X-ray which is shown, and we'll be discussing the X-ray after the options. Option A, oxygen therapy. Option B, surfactant administration and respiratory support. Option C, emergency surgical repair of the tracheoesophageal fistula. Or option D, wait and watch. So the question here is premature baby, 32 weeks, delivery by cesarean section, indication being fetal distress. Immediately after birth, neonate has features of respiratory distress, tachypnea, flaring, subcostal, intercostal retractions. Chest radiograph is given below, which is showing it has ground glass features, or we common call it as whiteout lung. We commonly call it as whiteout lung. Bilateral diffuse reticogranular opacities are seen, and also the prominent air bronchograms. These are the features in an X-ray of a respiratory distress syndrome: the whiteout lung and the prominent air bronchograms. So what will be the treatment option? As the child as a preterm is presenting with severe respiratory distress immediately after birth, in this case, we'll have to administer the surfactant and respiratory support, maybe by mechanical ventilation. So the answer is surfactant administration and the respiratory support. So this is our answer, because this is a patient of hyaline membrane disease. Hyaline membrane disease presenting immediately after birth with respiratory distress. And which needs treatment should be surfactant administration. So this was our answer, that is respiratory distress syndrome and chest X-ray showing white outline and prominent ear bronchograms. We'll have to administer the surfactant to the baby. Thank you.